Yes, we have made it. The faithful 12 whole weeks. That's amazing. Good. Pardon me? 11 for me. 11 for me. I still had to write it. I had to write 12. Yes, Sherry did do 1 week while I was away. Gallivanting. But yes, so you should be very proud of yourselves, of making it through. Any time we learn something new, it is a blessing for sure. So this evening, we are talking about more than a conqueror. And at first I struggled with, what picture should I put? Because what does it really mean to be more than a conqueror? And I read a devotional, and the devotional said that being more than a conqueror meant an overwhelming win. So not just winning 5-4, but when you win 20-2, that's more than a conqueror. I didn't really buy that too much. Thought that's probably a good win, but when the Bible says that we are more than conquerors, I didn't think it just meant that we overwhelmingly win against the odds. So thus the journey of discovering what it means, what I believe it means, to be more than a conqueror. So thought we'd start right back at the beginning, our very first text, which has been the text for the whole series. So starting at the starting line, we remember that our whole point is that we want to destroy strongholds. And who can remember the definition of a stronghold? Ooh, an incorrect pattern of thinking which one holds to be true. Excellent. Yes. And that comes from this text in 2 Corinthians. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God. And that's just it, is when we have an opinion or we build an argument, for example, something that says this is the way it will always be, or this is how I must act or I must think. When we do that, it is raised against the knowledge of God. And our goal is to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And where do our arguments come from? They come from our past experiences, and they come from being taught. They are taught to us, but they are not we're not innately born with a specific belief. I used to look after this little girl when I had just come back from university, and I was babysitting, and she just kept staying longer and longer, and eventually she just practically moved in with us. Anyway, she was this little blonde girl. She was about 5 years old. And I remember she was outside playing on her tricycle, and one day she was talking about her new friend. Everybody was her friend. And she was somebody who was visiting us was trying to determine which neighbor she was talking about. And they said, well, describe him. She's like, but it's just my friend. It's my friend. And the person said, well, are they black or are they white? And she went, I'll check tomorrow. It never entered into her mind. It was not something that we talked about in our house. It was not something that she obviously talked about in hers. You are who you are. And her argument, she had no argument that said the color of someone's skin has to do with anything of my being friends with someone. It was just totally not connected for her. And that's because it's not that you're born with it, you are taught it. And she expressed how she was taught and her experiences. We act on what we believe. Therefore, we set to change our mindset, not just change the behavior. So what we are good at doing as Christians is to work on the behavior. And that's why we're very good at the thou shalt nots. You shall not do this, you should not do this, you should not do that. And that's behavioral change. And that is very difficult because you don't really know why you're changing. And what that does, especially to children, is the child is sitting there going, well, what can I do, right? I remember when somebody was new to our church here, many, many years ago, And I went to see them after they were baptized a few weeks after. And she said, you know what? Like, what do you do on Sabbath? And we said, oh, come on over to our house. And we had them for lunch, etc. And she was like, oh, this is amazing. I said, well, what have you been doing? Well, my daughter and I sat on the couch and we read the Bible. I was like, really? All day? She's like, yep. Everything we knew we couldn't do, so we didn't do anything. So every week since I got baptized, I made my 8-year-old sit on the couch and read the Bible. Well, she must have been so grateful to be a Christian, right? But it's not the actions that we need to change. It's the mindset that we need to change. And once we break and destroy those strongholds, then what we do will flow out of that. When you are in love with someone, the actions will automatically go. You don't have to tell somebody to do something to somebody that they love. They will do that automatically. And that's why we have in our song, the things of this earth will grow strangely dim. And it's because your desires and your mindset has changed. All right, we'll go to the next one. Our text for this concept, it's a little small, comes from Romans 8, which says, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. So what we want to talk about tonight is this concept of being more than a conqueror, as we're talking about strongholds being destroyed and how we get to be more than conquerors. And the text says, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. So what things? We'll talk about that a little later. Our definitions on the next slide talks about conquer and gives you the definitions. No surprises. It means to overcome, to prevail, or to get the victory. So, again, we go back to our question for tonight. If being a conqueror means all these things, that you get the victory, what does it mean to be over and above a conqueror? So I want to look at one of my very favorite texts. It's Luke 22, 31 and 32. Now, I have a lot of favorite verses, so in my house it's kind of a joke when I say my favorite verse, so which one? But this one is my all-time favorite verse. If you ever wonder, this is my favorite verse. And it's Jesus when he's talking to Simon Peter. And he is talking to him just before he has the Passover, the last Passover before he goes to the cross. And I just picture him talking to him, pleading with him, knowing that he's not going to listen anyway, or at least some part of it, but he's really, really wants him to get the urgency. And it kind of reminds me of Alvin and I were going on a trip, and we were leaving the kids there for the night, and then they'd get picked up in the morning for the week. But we knew that they were going to leave the lights on, they were going to leave the stove on, or there was going to be some disaster, the door was going to be unlocked for the week, or something would happen. And we sat the kids down, and we were going, AJ, please, you cannot leave the stove on. We cannot get a call in Alberta that we have no home. AJ, please. And there was an urgency. Obviously, the urgency that Jesus spoke with was much more, and it had much more significant consequences. But he says, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith will not fail. And when you turn back, strengthen your brothers. That's the best text in the whole Bible. Okay, so we'll go through it as to why I think that is the best text. You are more than a conqueror when, number one, you not only overcome, but you testify. So in this part, it said, when you return, strengthen your brothers. And that's why I love this. Because he didn't even fall yet. He didn't even make the mistake yet. And Jesus said, when you return, Jesus like skipped over the whole fault part and went to when you return. See, I love that. Because for me, that is one of my things. Feeling like a failure or failing, that is can be one of my strongholds. It is one thing if, I'm not able to do something, but if I fail you at something, that's very difficult for me. Very difficult. And the fact that Jesus says, Laura, you're going to mess up. I'm hoping you're not going to mess up, but you're going to mess up. But when you come back, strengthen everybody else. That's awesome. And we get the story of Peter to talk about, but we each must have our own story and our own testimony, because the only way you get a testimony is to go through a test. That's the only way. Nobody gets up and says, you know what? I had a wonderful day, and when I got baptized, everything was so perfect, and God is so good, and I love him forever. I have never heard that as a testimony. Never. There's always a challenge, a trial, an overcoming, and the overcoming is learning to get through that with Christ. In my own life, I have told you a bit of my own story. And when I was in grade 6, we were going to Trinidad. We were going to Trinidad, and I was getting my next passport. But now I was old enough to read my passport, and I had waited to get it. When I got it, my passport said Laura Henry. And I said, well, they put the wrong name on the passport, because I'm not Laura Henry. I'm Laura Stump. So somebody needs to go and fix this passport. At which point I was told, no, actually you are Laura Henry. And everyone else in the family has a last name of Stump, but you do not. And the reason was because my stepfather chose not to adopt me, so I did not have the same name as anyone. Well, that can have an effect on you. It pretty much can. But I didn't know my own father, my birth father. And in fact, I knew zero about him. My mother found it very difficult to talk about him, and I just didn't ever want to cause her that pain and that challenge, so I just decided it didn't mean anything to me, so I would just leave it alone and never ask, and that was it, because I didn't want to put her in that position. And I went to a women's retreat sometime coming to after this church. And at the retreat, the woman, the speaker, said, she was talking about her father and how important the role of a father is in a child's life, but particularly in a girl's life. And she said, I want you on this paper to write down your description and any emotions that you feel about your father. And I sat there, and I looked at this paper. I didn't have one word to write. Nothing. All I knew was that he was man. I assumed he was tall. That's it. Nothing. And I literally I was just overwhelmed. I got up, I walked outside, and I sat under a tree and bawled. And that was the first time in all of those years that I ever thought that there might be a reason for me to understand something. Or I thought, this actually impacts me. It just was something that I shoved way back. And I talked to God, prayed about it and whatever. But because I am at heart a student, I had to go back to class. And I went back in, and she continued talking, and she was talking about how God wanted to be our Father. And I mean, I knew God was Father. You know that. But the text that she looked at was, I think it's Romans 8. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption. I got to be adopted by God. So who cares if an earthly man decided he didn't want to? And we cry, and by him we cry, Abba, translated Daddy. I don't know the verse. I believe it's Romans 8. There you go. This is my secretary. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now, if we are children, we are heirs. Heirs of God and joint heirs or co-heirs with Christ. So that means, we could just stop right here. Because that isn't just that you get to be one of God's kids, you get to be co-heirs with Christ. In the family ranking, it's the same. He doesn't look at us any differently. You're not a stepchild, you're not an you're adopted, but it's not different. It's the same. And if indeed we share in his sufferings in order that we may also share in his glory, he predestined us for adoption through sonship, through Jesus Christ, in accordance with his pleasure. Pleasure. It was God's pleasure to adopt us. And I think sometimes we think that God tolerates us. He has to love us. He's God. Really, what can he do? He can't hate us. He has to. He's love. No, he delights in us. He takes pleasure in us. That's an awesome, awesome concept. And we are the only ones as Christians who have a God who takes pleasure in us. In all other religions, you have to appease that God. You got to make him happy. In accordance with his pleasure and his will. Okay, so I got way off on a tantrum there. But the point is that we become more than a conqueror because not only do we just get through the situation, we get through and we strengthen others. I get to stand here to tell you my story, and not for you to feel sorry for me, not for you to think whatever about my dad or my stepdad. It wasn't my dad's fault that he died, but whatever it is, it's not because of that. It's because the only reason I get to stand here as a semi-functioning, normal human being is because of God. That's it. And that means that we get to be more than a conqueror. Second reason is because you get to win after a restart. So in my house, we often look at the Olympics, and Evan likes to watch the track. I don't like to watch the track races. Reason is because, or the skating. Now, I don't mind watching the skating if I already know who won, but I don't like it when they fall or whatever, because it just gets, I'm like I'm in whatever it is that I'm watching. So, but what happens with the track, why I don't like it, is because if you do a false start, if you whatever, you're done. I think that is horrible. You've trained for years and years, and just for one little thing, and you're done. That is so not fair. And in my house, I will get up, and I will yell at the TV, and I will yell at the judge, and I'm done. I'm upstairs. It's just, that is wrong. That is wrong, wrong, wrong. Yes, we need to do something about that, Sister Pearl. Something. It's wrong. But in God's eyes, you get to restart. Amen. Love that. And not just once, over and over and over. Thank God for that. That text in Romans starts that there is now no condemnation in him. It doesn't say there's no condemnation in the first round. It says there is no condemnation. And when we look at Peter, he did fall. And he didn't fall once. He fell 3 times. I mean, more than that. But in this instance, he denied Christ 3 times. But it didn't disqualify him from the race. He was still a disciple. He was, and not just a disciple, he was still a leader. That you still get to win after a restart is another reason why you can, how to be more than a conqueror. And number 3, you just keep going. This I think I like too, because in the definition of the word conqueror, it pretty much says you have to win. But the way that the Bible goes, you don't actually have to win according to us. You just have to keep going. What do I mean by that? Another favorite verse that I have is in Romans 4, and it's verses 18 to 20. And I like this verse, and when I found this one, again, I was quite excited. It talks about Abraham. Now, we know about Abraham. What was Abraham's promise? Have a great nation. You must have a child to have a great nation. Absolutely. And that was to be him and Sarah. And they got tired of waiting. They failed in my book. They called up Hagar, and they decided they were going to make some arrangements with the little lady on the side, and she was going to deliver the child of promise, right? Well, that was clearly wrong, clearly bad. He failed. Done. Go home. But he gets a restart. Not only does he get a restart, God described him in Romans 4. This is what it says about Abraham. Remember Abraham. Against all hope, Abraham in hope believed, and so became the father of many nations, just as it had been said to him, so shall your offspring be. Check this phrase out. Without weakening in his faith. He faced the fact that his body was as good as dead. Didn't weaken in his faith. Do you remember Ishmael, right? Okay. Since he was about 100 years old, and that Sarah's womb was also dead. Here we go again. Yet he did not waver through unbelief. Huh? Okay. Regarding the promise of God, but was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God, being fully persuaded that God had the power to do what he promised. Now that doesn't sound anything like the story in Genesis. Not to me. But God doesn't grade or mark us in the same way that we do. Sometimes being more than a conqueror is to just keep going. We are tired, we are exhausted, we are not sure that we are going to make it, but you keep going. And our trials are just that. So, came up with a picture. On the next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, you can be more than a conqueror like that guy who won the race, but you can still be more than a conqueror looking like that guy. Because he just kept going. And I think some days, most days, I feel more like that guy than that guy. But it's okay, because it's just having the faith to keep going. That's what it is. It's having faith in your frustration. We think sometimes, especially when we think of these Bible characters, we've put them so high up. And we think, wow, they're just amazing. And the Bible says Elijah was a man just like us. They wanted to make real sure there was no way. Paul said, 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in dangers from rivers and from bandits, from my fellow Jews, from the Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger in the sea, and in danger from false believers. And guess what? Paul was on the right track. Paul was doing exactly what God wanted him to do. Because we think sometimes when we're going through 5 lashes that, we must be doing something wrong. God isn't happy. No, you don't know that. Paul did all of this, and he was on the right track. It's not an easy life. But Paul kept going. He kept going. And that really is the message that I want us to walk away with tonight. Keep going. I don't know what it is that you're going through, but I guarantee you're going through something. And if you aren't, you're going to. Sorry, but you are. Because we all are. And when we're in that, we have to keep going. Even if on your knees and you got one hand out, keep going. In the Ephesians 6, where it talks about the weapons that we use in our warfare, it says, and above all, take the shield of faith. And sometimes I picture, the shield that the Romans had. It was very long, and a man could hide behind it. And sometimes the man would just take the shield and just go down. And the arrows would hit that. And I think sometimes I feel like that. And I've said, God, I don't think I can take up a sword right now. I can't be wielding any sword. I'm pretty tired. But I am just going to stay here behind this shield. And it's up to you. And that too is just keep going. Just keep going. We need to say, I am not the Christ, as John did. When we live as more than conquerors, we keep God on the throne. When we looked at each of the strongholds, in a way, I realized that a stronghold is really an alternate theology. Because we said that pride was an attempt to dethrone God and put ourselves on the throne. So really, any of those strongholds is putting ourselves on the throne and taking God off. So the only way we can stay more than a conqueror is to ensure that God stays on his throne. The thing is, the only way God can stay on his throne, meaning that he can take our thoughts captive and lead our lives, is if we know his character. And if we know who he is, and if we know how he would govern. Because if you don't know how he's going to govern his world or his desires, how on earth can you meet his needs? So part of keep going is to be in his word and to spend time with him. I mean, imagine a marriage where you don't talk, you don't see each other. It's not very good. The other day I said to Alvin, and I'm sure he was joking, I said, let's talk. And he goes, about what? What'd you say? But that's just it. And I was thinking, I have never called my girlfriends or had them call me and say, hey, we should get together and, let's go grab some hot chocolate and talk. About what? Doesn't happen. We are going to find stuff to talk about. And then we're going to go, oh my goodness, our husbands are so going to want to know where we are. Right? That's how it goes. Because you have a rapport, you have a relationship with that person. Right? You don't pick up the phone and call somebody that you don't like. And you're never with that person that you don't like for very long, and you're like, oh wow, that time just flew. No, it doesn't happen. Because you don't like them, or perhaps you just don't know them, right? I'm a strange person that way. I am naturally an introvert, and I will always be, my comfort zone is being quiet, being by myself in a small group. But I love this. I don't know, just God. This I love. But put me in like a social situation at work. As a manager, we have a lot of, what do you call them? Wine and cheese that we have to go to. I hate those. Everybody coming up and giving small talk. I really don't care. I know that sounds bad, but I cannot talk about the weather. I cannot talk about, I don't care that much about the weather. I don't. And I feel like I look at them and I just want to say, do you know how to be more than a conqueror? What's your, I just can't, but I struggle with that. And Alvin and I have this deal that if we're ever in that situation, he's the lead. And if you ever see us in something like that, I will be very quiet, and Alvin will always be the big talker, because he can thrive in that. He can thrive. Me? No. It's such an effort. I am the one that first time when I was going out to clients, I would literally try and watch the news or something so that I would have something to talk about with these people before I got there. Always. I'd call up somebody and say, okay, so was there a game last night? Who played? What happened? Difficult for me. How did I get way off here? I have no idea how I got here. Oh, because you have to know somebody. That's it. You have to know somebody. And when you know them and when you have a relationship with them, you desire them and the conversation flows and it's easy. So yes. So I want to encourage you, even though we are done this Bible study as a large group, you don't have to be done this Bible study as an individual. I highly doubt that everybody did all the individual work every week. But, you did? Oh, no, okay. So you can go back and you can do it on your own, right? You don't have to do it the week that it was done, and you don't have to do one every day, right? There's only three questions for every week. Do them at your leisure, or take 3 weeks to do one question. Reflect and talk to God, whatever. But I want to encourage you. Put down the remote. Pick up the Bible. Turn off the radio in the car. Put a CD in. Or listen to a podcast. Forget the tape. Right? Do something that will develop your relationship with God. It's amazing. YouTube you can find anything on there. And you hear so many people saying, I didn't know how to do this, and I didn't know how to do that, but there was a video on YouTube, and I figured it out. But I've never heard anybody say, I went on to develop my relationship with God. I went on to try and figure out even how to have a better relationship with my spouse. We don't do it. It's priority. What are your priorities? The only way to keep God on the throne is to know how he would rule. You cannot keep God on the throne if you don't know how he rules. So if you are saying, I don't think God would do that, I don't think God would allow that, you need to ask yourself, do you really know God? We will never truly know every aspect of God, of course, because if we could, we would be God ourselves. But we want to know him enough to have a solid relationship with him. Remember, the goal here is not to hurdle your strongholds, not to go around your strongholds, but to totally and utterly demolish the strongholds. Go back to Jericho, and how were those walls destroyed? And they were destroyed when the people went around and they praised their God. And they praised him before the wall went down. And I want to encourage you in your keep goingness that you praise and that I praise. And as someone reminded me when I was complaining, they said, Laura, do you believe the text that says God will supply all your need and you will lack nothing? Yep. Then if you don't have something, you must not need it, or God's a liar. Ugh. But it's true. I probably don't need it now. Or huh? Oh, I don't know if I can say it again. The text was, she said, do you believe God will supply all your needs and that you will lack nothing? And I said, yes. And the point was, if I truly believed that, then if I need something, I would have it. Either that or God's lying. So that means that I don't need an extra 1,000 in my bank account right now. I think I do. And it sure would come in helpful. But I must not need it right now. Because it must be more important that I learn to trust God right now. It must be. It must be that I have challenges in my life because I need to learn to what? To trust, to love, to give. God doesn't do things by mistake, and he certainly doesn't do things randomly. So again, we go back to our text that that we need to ask God to take every thought captive to his obedience. So I want to thank you for doing this study with me, for taking the journey with me, and thank the pastors for allowing me to use you as guinea pigs, but to do this together.